Well, jury selection began today in the trial of two men accused of smuggling people into the United States from Canada. They included a family of four from India who froze to death in 2022. The family died while trying to cross the border during a blizzard. Two American men face a list of charges, including several counts related to human smuggling. CBC's Caitlin Garelick is at the courthouse in Minnesota.
Prosecutors say it's a case about one thing: two men putting profit above people's lives. They say that's what led to an incident that made headlines in Manitoba almost 3 years ago. Jagdish and Vaishali Patel and their 11 and 3-year-old kids were found frozen in Manitoba, a few meters from the U.S. border in January 2022. Harsh Kumar Patel, no relation to the victims, and Steve Shand have pleaded not guilty to several counts related to human smuggling. Shand was arrested near the border with other Indian nationals in the van he was driving. Patel is accused of coordinating the smuggling and hiring Shand. Patel's lawyers say he's been wrongfully accused in the case. Shands say he was a taxi driver who was used by Patel and didn't know who he was transporting in his vehicle. Those opening statements came after a jury was selected to hear the case Monday morning. Potential jurors were asked about their views on topics like immigration and whether the case involving the deaths of young children would make them unable to be fair. Those with strong views were excused from the jury. So were some who said they followed the case closely. The jury selected for the trial will start hearing evidence Tuesday. Caitlin Garelick, CBC News, Fergus Falls, Minnesota.
All right, to explain further about why we're hearing so many stories about these tragic cases, Craig Damian Smith joins me now. He's a research affiliate at the Centre for Refugee Studies at York University, joining us from Toronto. Craig, really appreciate you giving us your time today.
Thanks for having me, Angie.
I want to get your perspective here. We've now got a trial is taking place 2 years after this family tragically died trying to cross over, this happening in a blizzard. From what you've seen here, from that point on to where we are now, has anything changed when we look at sort of the state of human smuggling between Canada and the United States?
It's changed insofar as far as we know, based on U.S. authority numbers, that the number of encounters at the border, people being apprehended by Customs and Border Protection, has increased 2023 to 2024 to about 200,000 people. So it seems to be a thriving business model.
And with that being said, now, of course, you're looking at, I guess, as we can classify, a lucrative smuggling market.
Absolutely. I mean, when we look at smuggling, it's important to understand that there's a lot of different business models at play. Some people who may have their immigration status lapsing in Canada might make the choice to try to get to the U.S. Between official border crossings. But in this case, we have a case of a really transnational smuggling ring where people are recruited with falsified documents, brought to Canada with the promise and the kind of full service of being picked up in Canada with visas intact and then brought over to the border in the U.S., which is a much more sophisticated model and largely what we see coming out of India through Canada to the U.S.
What about, let's factor in now, speaking of the United States, a new administration, the Trump administration will be coming in come January. What kind of impact could that have?
Well, in 2016 and 2017, we saw an increase in asylum claims at Roxham Road on the New York-Quebec border. Mm-hmm. That won't be as much of an issue now because Canada and the U.S. Renegotiated what's called the U.S. Canada Safe Third Country Agreement, so extended that agreement to the entirety of the border and not just official border crossings. So we may see more of a drive for more clandestine migration over the border there. And it's really an open question as to whether or not people will still be, or the markets will still be there for people to come through Canada to the US. We also saw in recent years reimposition of visa requirements for Mexican nationals to arrive in Canada, because once the southern border, so the US-Mexico border, was essentially closed to asylum, more people were making the decision to fly to Canada and then go to the US. Those types of markets, have been disrupted, and the question remains as to what type of next step smuggling organizations might take. I mean, if there's one thing that we do know, it's that these organizations are very adaptable. And as long as there's the demand for people to move, whether that's for economic opportunities or safety, those markets will be available.
So with that being said, and you mentioned the Safe Third Country Agreement, that being expanded last year in response, we also know that between the United States and Canada, this sort of decision coming between the two of them, that several Canadian border crossings are not necessarily going to be open now 24/7, if you will, 10 of which we know are in Quebec. Will that have an impact, and I guess in reducing this now because the accessibility will be lower?
From my understanding, that the decision to change the hours and change which borders are open is to reallocate resources and to harmonize with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. I think that it's telling that this is due to come into effect in January. There's a difference, however, between people crossing at regular borders and then people trying to cross between border crossings, what we call irregular border crossings.
Right.
I think that one thing that might be clear there is that kind of harmonizing between the CBSA and the Customs and Border Protection in the U.S., there might be a focus on more speedy returns of people who cross the border and then are returned back to the U.S. or vice versa.
When we look at what happened with this family 2 years ago, do you think, Craig, that we are properly equipped to handle, to prevent this kind of, thing from happening? Whether, I mean, one, we're dealing with the human smuggling aspect of it, but then because of the nature of what's been happening here, families being abandoned, people are dying. Do you think that, does there need to be more resources put towards this?
I mean, you can go on social media. I mean, there's several Instagram accounts that I know of where people are openly advertising trips from Montreal to New York. Tens of thousands of followers on these accounts. We know that education campaigns and making people aware of what's happening and the types of kind of predation and danger that they might face have some effect on people's decisions to move, and approaching it from like a safety perspective and approaching it from a rights perspective rather than like an anti-crime crackdown enforcement perspective, I think is the way that this can be addressed.
We're going to be watching it very closely indeed, and again, what unfolds at this trial as well. Craig, really appreciate you giving us your time today. Craig Damien Smith is a research affiliate at the Center for Refugee Studies at York University. Thank you again for this.